is Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. Here are your hosts, Dr. Tim Slecker and Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, educated educators talking education.
Welcome Thursday night, Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk, educated educators talking education. Yeah, it's a Thursday night. The number, if you want to jump in, it's 855-752-4842, 855-752-4842. Johnny on location there in Seattle, man.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
Tim, you know I love to visit all the campuses. So I'm over here at University of Washington campus in downtown Seattle. It's great. Just was over at the Jimi Hendrix Experience this afternoon, and like most cities, there's a rich musical history here, and there's a whole energy and vibe. So great to be here tonight. It's Thursday, Tim.
Yeah, it's Thursday. You make me jealous here. Where I'm at, there's I think we have a street light right now, and we've elevated to a new 24-hour convenience store. So guess what? You can get really bad hot dogs at 3 a.m. All is well. Yeah, it is Busted Pencils, man. We have a great tonight, special guest was there again. This has been the week of people coming back from the beginning of Busted Pencils. We had Nancy Carlson Page, Matt Damon's mom, on Monday. And here we are now too. Yeah, well, let's do an introduction. He was the drummer from bands Public Image, Limited, Ministry, 9 Inch Nails, Pigface, Killing Joke. He's also now the curator and the coordinator of music industry at Millikan University, teacher of music business for over 30 years, and founder of the Museum of Post-Punk and Industrial Music. Welcome to Busted Pencils, Martin Atkins. Martin, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. It's nice to see you, Tim. It's been a while.
Yeah, right.
It has. It's been a while, Martin, because in 2014 is when you and I got introduced. I was just putting together this. It was a podcast then at the time, and I was introduced to you through a mutual friend, Randy Hawk, who was a radio person in Madison, Wisconsin. He said, Randy, hey, if you're going to do an education with a punk rock theme, you got to meet Martin Atkins. And we got connected. You had an interview in the Progressive magazine, and you were the second guest right after Matt Damon's mom on the original Busted Pencils. Martin, in fact, let's bring this back up, because what it was is you have a T-shirt. In fact, I see it now on the Museum of Post-Punk and
I love it.
Industrial. It's still there, but you have a decal and a saying, education is the next punk rock. Is that still true today?
Yeah, I mean, well, and what's true is we need to market these ideas. You can't just say to kids, an education's important. You're going to get punched in the face, or worse, ignored. There goes the old guy. But if you can, there's that Nelson Mandela quote, which is really great. Education is the most powerful weapon. And these are great things to put on T-shirts and just have be part of the landscape, so that if I'm not pushing that message, there's a bunch of people out there wearing that shirt. Sometimes I'll have a student wear that shirt in class, and I'm like, so it's just important to let people know that education's important, and it is punk, and I'm still learning. I'm 65 in August. I'm still learning. Chat GPT, let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go. Well, I mean, Martin, it's like, when it was that idea of putting this through, it's like people like, an education talk show. That sounds so boring. It was like, no, man, education, punk rock, it goes together if we're doing education as opposed to what Johnny always says, schooling and indoctrination. When we're talking about education, we're talking about setting fires, lighting the curiosity. And I know, when you're sitting there going, it's like, well, it's anti schooling, anti what it means to be successful in schools, but education. And that's the nature that we've been trying to say, is that if you want to liberate public schools, then let's do the punk rock and let's make it educational. Because Martin, as you're talking about education, yeah, opening your eyes, the curiosity. And I think about that now here, Martin, it's 2024. It's 10 years now since you and I got introduced. And I was wondering, I mean, we're going to talk a lot about the accomplishments that you've had over the 10 years, particularly the museum. But from the education standpoint, any observations, have we gotten more punk rock or have we gotten less punk rock when we think about standard traditional schooling education?
Well, I think there's a few things going on. I think it seems to me like things are going backwards. And uh, whereas I think when we spoke 10 years ago, I go in the classroom, I'm like, there's no curriculum for this class. What should we do? And the students are like, huh? But would rise to the occasion, would invent things, would pull things out of themselves, challenge themselves. Sometimes now people are more guarded, they're more anxious, they're more frightened. And I see this thing in play where if you say to somebody, you can do anything for this semester, I'll see some students go, well, if I set the task of seeing if I can go across the room to that chair and pick up a cup, I'll get an A because I can do that. So they limit themselves to play it safe. And I've just started seeing this. It's kind of come into focus after the pandemic, that we went into the pandemic pretty well, I thought. We had a conference called Midwest Music Expo, and we did it on campus at Millikan, and it was great. We had like almost 300 people from Nashville and Chicago and Indianapolis, and it was all right. And I was sitting with the class strategizing what we do for number 2, and they were all excited. And as the pandemic was on the rise, I said, listen, guys, the better the job we do with this conference, the worse we're going to feel, because we can't be bringing people together from several different states right now. And we canceled it. It immediately felt wrong. And by the following week, we were experimenting with this brand new thing we'd never heard of called Zoom, and then we ran a conference on Zoom, and it was like doom for about a week. And then Lon Tolhurst, the drummer from The Cure, he lives in LA. There was no way he was going to fly to Chicago, drive 3 hours to Decatur, and give us 2 days of his time. But he gave us an hour of his time. And suddenly, Randy Blythe from Lamb of God, the singer from Lamb of God, Michael Alago, who signed Metallica at the age of 23. Suddenly we've got this all-star lineup. And it was like, well, I mean, there were lots of very bad things about the pandemic, but we saw very clearly that was an alternative and perhaps a silver lining, But I don't know how the current students would react if they were faced with those challenges again today.
I wonder, when you're talking about even the students today, and Johnny, we've talked about this too, is if you're seeing, this maybe lack of curiosity, whether the pandemic or whether though too, because you're at Millikan University, you're talking about, roughly college age students. They experienced the pandemic, but on top of that, Martin, they've been in school for over 10 to 15 years. And I wonder that the criticism that we leveled against schools 10 years ago, saying like, man, they're too standard, they're not creating curiosity. If that's what you're potentially seeing now is the result of, Johnny, jump in here, the result of schooling as opposed to the result of education. Johnny?
Oh yeah, man. I just love hearing that because I mean, I agree with Martin here, that there are all kinds of emerging possibilities that come from all situations, and so, as we get complacent in like, the status quo or the compliance structures of schools, it just I always get excited to see what the next generation is bringing to go against that grain, right? And I think we're in one of those moments where we saw a lot of emerging creativity from the COVID moment, and now we're sort of in this maybe like a little bit of a calm after the storm, and I'm not sure exactly where or what's coming next, but I'm excited to be here for it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely ripples. There's aftershocks.
Ripples. Yeah.
And I look at ChatGPT and all these other things, and it's one thing to look at ChatGPT having done all of this analog stuff before, pre-internet, pre-cell phones, I don't know what it would be like to jump straight into ChatGPT now and have it start giving you answers.
Right.
We have this different old analog mindset where we can look at the answers and have a kind of a critical eye on what's going on. So yeah, there's a lot going on right now. I hear a lot of work-life balance, and which I'm just like, well, good luck with that.
Yeah, right.
I don't know what to tell you, And look, we should be conscious of work-life balance and strive for more balance. But there are times, in the music business, in the museum business, as I'm finding, when you're hot, you're hot. When you're not, you're not. And you make hay while the sun shines. And I like my deadliest catch analogy. You got people fishing on the boat. When there's crabs, they'll work 36 hours straight. Somebody will cut their finger open and they'll just wrap some electrical tape around it. It's a different generation now.
Yeah, that
the number's 855. Go ahead, Johnny.
Well, no, yeah. I mean, give us a call, folks. 855-752-4842. Give us a ring. But Martin, that really reminds me too of, I hear a lot about life balance and these things. And it reminds me that so many folks, one, how lucky we are to be working in something we love and breathe. Like we live, love, and breathe music, creativity, these kinds of discussions. Tim and I talk about how lucky we are to teach teachers and to have, stayed in that sort of punk rock education realm that has always just been part of the fabric of our lives. So we're lucky for that. But I'm reminded when I hear so much work-life balance talk that we've really become a culture of work being pretty awful. And I hate that for kids. I hate that for future generations because, so few of us get to experience that pure joy of, like you said, when it's going, and you're going.
Yeah. We're always sowing the seeds. Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. Educated educators talking education. The number 855-752-4842. Our guest, he is the founder of the museum and the curator of the Museum of Post-Punk and Industrial Music. He's a drummer from the bands Public Image Limited, Ministry, 9 Inch Nails, Pigface, Killing Joke, educator, Millikan University, music, business, education, just all around awesome, great guy. Martin, we've talked a lot about, so education, the next punk, rock. Johnny had a question during the break, though, I think that might be worth exploring here because you're now the curator and the founder of the Museum of Post-Punk in Industrial Music. So I wonder if now it's time for a little education to give us a sense of, so what's it mean to be post-punk?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So, and the more I find out about these genres that we thought were linear, punk, post-punk, I mean, that makes sense. But all of industrial music, all of these things were kind of going along at the same time. I choose to say that post-punk would be, I would say, the end of the Sex Pistols and the beginning of Public Image Limited. So a very different mindset, a different sound, concentrating on the art and the packaging and the media and the fashion along with the music. And that was 1978. And then punk kind of solidified itself with the look of the leather jacket, the mohawk, the attitude that kind of carried on. And those of us that have been in punk and experimenting were now working with post-punk and then industrial electronics, sampling, production, studio techniques, and then education and record labels and getting involved in all of it, and then plugging that back into teaching. But all these subgenres are fascinating. All of these connections. I'm still educating myself on all of this stuff.
Oh man, what a
Johnny, you had
gift!
that
I
question,
mean,
man.
I'm just loving it and soaking this up because I love history, especially musical history. And we always say this: all music is political, right? It's either for the kings or the queens or the serfs on the other side of the wall. And punk has such a rich history of always being, unapologetically political, and in your face political. And so to hear this idea and to kind of have that marker here of post punk. I remember being a kid and listening to Sex Pistols and having that sort of as like the history of it, and then my mind being blown when like Minor Threat kind of came onto the scene, and it was just like boom, oh my goodness, the energy of things. And then over the years, every generation having that sort of iteration of things. But I'm really stricken by Martin reminding us, and this bring it to the educational piece, is we often think of musical genres as just that musical genre, right? But I think punk, like, it stands for so much more, right? To have that adjective or even to situate it as a noun, so diving into that idea of post-punk and punk, Martin's talking about, it's more than just the music. It's all that experimentation that goes far beyond that, and into the and like you said, Martin, you really explicitly situated it in connection with education,
right? And I've thought about some of this stuff. Like, people say, well, it's questioning everything, do it yourself.
yes.
Like, and that's a great slogan on a t-shirt, but here I am, I didn't like major record labels, so I started my own. And I wanted more control in the recording studio, so I started my own. I accidentally started teaching, and there wasn't a book, so I wrote one. And and then I started a museum. And it wasn't like, I'm not saying then I wrote a book and then I started a museum. I'm like, well, I know I'm going to do this today and see where this goes, without affectation or hopes particularly. I just wanted to get my hands dirty and see what happened. And then you start to question things like, we have an exhibit in the museum. It's an album by a band called Durutti Column from 1980 with a sandpaper sleeve. And there's all kinds of things I can tell you about that album. But it's, eventually over 2 or 3 years, it will destroy the album to the left and the right of it in your collection.
Yeah.
But, and I acquired it for the museum. It cost hundreds, like $500 or $600. I wanted it because of all this amazing packaging I already have. I wanted it in there. But then it's like, well, hold on. I've got people like looking at this sandpaper, and I thought, well, here, have a feel. And I held it out for this person to grab, and I pulled it out of their hands so they could feel the sandpaper. And they said, ooh, it's sandpaper. And I'm like, well, I realized they didn't know it was sandpaper just from looking at it.
Yeah.
So then you have this punk anarchic view of a museum where here's a valuable artifact that, by showing it correctly and illustrating to people how different it is, it will eventually be destroyed. But I think it's more correct to let people touch it. Sometimes there's 10 people in a line touching this thing. It's more correct for people to touch it and experience it than it is to put it behind a glass in a glass case.
Man, so many thoughts on that, Johnny. Thinking about right the idea of truly, like you say, it's like okay, there's this sandpaper cover, but looking at it, and I think about that too as we're talking about truly transformative teaching and learning is that so often, and I think Martin, you and I have talked about this for a couple times. We ask students, learners, to learn by watching stuff behind the glass, observing it behind the glass, and then we get really concerned when they don't learn or they don't have an appreciation of the things that we're doing. And it's like, well, maybe it's we're the problems then. And realizing this, and that illustration right there is just so graphic to recognize and go. So, if you really want to do education, if you really want to do punk rock, if you really want to do a museum, it's got to be lived.
Yeah.
Is what I'm hearing you say it.
Yeah. So we let Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails sang a song with Pigface called "Suck," and I own that intellectual property. So we'll let people go into the studio with my engineer and do their own mix of that song, and leave with it on a cassette. I'm not there going, oh, let me listen to this is my song. Let me listen to that before you leave with it. No, it's your mix. It's your crappy mix. It's your badly executed mix with not much technique, but it's your mix. It's special to you. Take it away, And the more you start to explore these ideas that we've already talked about 10 plus years ago, the better you get at letting go and doing these things. It's not easy, but it's a skill that builds on itself.
It's a realization. It's Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. The number's 855-752-4842. Our guest, Martin Atkins. Yes, he's the curator, founder of the Museum of Post-Punk and Industrial Music, also educator extraordinaire. Punk education is the next punk rock. Martin, when we get back, though, let's really dive into the museum. Where did it come from?
Yeah,
How's
let's
it going?
go.
And it's just named the number one museum in Chicago. Busted Pencils, back in the break. There it is. Hold all of our hands. It's Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. The number's 855-752-4842. Our guest, the founder, curator of the Museum of Post-Punk and Industrial Music, the generator of education is the next punk rock. Martin Atkins is our guest, talking everything education, museum, punk rock, sandpaper album covers, and the fact that if you really want to know about a sandpaper album cover, you can't look at it behind glass. You got to put your fingers on it and have Martin yank it out so you can feel that roughness. Right now, though, we got a caller Joanne. Joanne, our friend, how are you? What's going on?
Fantastic discussion. I just had to mention that Billie Eilish and 200 other musicians and artists put together a letter that was just released a few days ago saying that AI is a menace that needs to be controlled, or the creativity of the world is going to be constrained. And talking to three people right now who just have an enormous creativity, I'm just wondering if the creativity is the problem, or perhaps even something like intellectual property, that people won't have a sense of intellectual property if AI takes off and starts gobbling up our works and all of that. So I'll listen. I again, a fantastic discussion.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you, Joanne. Martin.
I'm reminded of a few things with AI. One is punk rock. The traditional music industry, the heavy rock bands, forbade their labels to sign the Sex Pistols. If you sign the Sex Pistols, we're leaving. That was A&M Records, Herb Alpert. Artists threatened to leave. This isn't music, it's crap, blah, blah, blah. And then the introduction of the drum machine, I want to say 1972, somebody called me and said, that's it for you. That's it for you, Martin. And I'm like, what? What's happened? Like, there's a drum machine now, mate. I'm like, oh, that's it. I'm finished. And then I heard the first drum machine. Boop, 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 boop. like, okay, my job was safe for a while.
Yeah.
But what I thought was the differentiator between me and a better drum machine was my brain and the way I hear things and the way I think. And so drum machines immediately got rid of terrible drummers.
Yeah.
Right, that you're gone. Because if you're really bad, then a Dr. Rhythm is going to be better. And I see all of the same side taking. I see some fear. I see a lot of fear, and I just started to present on this. Photographers. If you're not going to get hired if you're difficult on a fashion shoot, and neither are the models, because they can all be replaced with AI really successfully.
Mm-hmm.
There's a social media influencer on Instagram making 11 grand a month. And I say to my students, well, at least you can make 11 grand a month on Instagram, except, oops, that influencer is AI run by a company out of Barcelona. And so it's here. The music mastering for the last few years, a company called Landr, Landr, has all the AI to you'd say it's a hip hop track, it's this, it's that. It knows what it needs to do to make your track sound the best in that genre. And it's next to nothing to use that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's a product for lawyers called Spellbook, which I just demoed in my legal class today. It was flabbergasting. Hey, watch out. This is in California, and California law states, boom, just boilerplate stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
like, look out, LegalZoom. There's a program called I, which I was just on there yesterday, free trial, of course. Give me a hip hop track with a little bit of glitchy beats, with a dub delay and some xylophone and some CB radio squawk. Boop. And you have to wait 58 seconds, which of course is going to drive this generation insane. Where's the upgrade? And then here's this track. And it's not just some rinky dink, whatever. You can download it as stems, as a multi-track recording. You can just have the voice, just have the backing. You can mess around with it. And it's quite playful for some people. For me, I might use that kind of thing to create a texture that I might use instead of a loop to drum to. I play drums to a Mickey Mouse watch and a can of WD-40, like different things, inspire different things. But clearly, subpar, mediocre performance is going to be replaced by AI.
Yes. Yeah.
So I teach music business because somebody at Cisco, well, one of the reasons, somebody at Cisco said, a creative problem-solving mindset is the new job security.
Yes.
So pivot, understand what's going on, and use it. I told my students today, you can use AI for an assignment, but if I see it, I'm really going to ding you, So maybe you want to prompt into AI, include 3 mistakes to make this a more, but we're all thinking and being engaged, The problem is, I think I mentioned this before, we were looking at contracts, and if you haven't gone through the analog version, sheets of paper, and your mind isn't already thinking about the possible problems and things like, where is this contract constructed? What are some parts of the contract? If you're just looking at what ChatGPT or Spellbook tells you, then you could be at a disadvantage. Maybe some people will use these tools initially, and then it will pull them in to gain greater legal knowledge for themselves, so they can be more better users of the AI. or they can, maybe it frees up some of their brain time to look at other things.
Yep.
That was the interest.
That's what I was going to say, Martin. Yeah, well, in fact, so I'm going to bring the loop all the way back. And Joanne, and yeah, thank you for the call. And thank you for the question, because it's so rich to put that in there. But I've had this conversation. Johnny and I teach teachers.
Mhm.
And, one of the things, when you spend a lot of time teaching teachers, you spend a lot of time teaching them how to write lesson plans. And at this point now, there's a conversation going on with AI saying, hey, guess what? AI writes a really good lesson plan. Why are we spending, hours and hours and hours of our time teaching students to write lesson plans, when the reality is we want them to teach powerful lessons, not spend so much darn time writing lesson plans? So does this AI give us the opportunity to say, hey, you don't have to spend that much time on the busy work. Now you can get really creative and become a great teacher.
Well,
I've also heard people say you can't do that, though, unless you understand the foundation and the function of an original type of lesson plan. Johnny's got this kind of book now, too.
I mean, yeah, I love this conversation because it's rolling with, the emerging stuff that's happening. We talked about, I love that Martin brought up the drum machine. We've talked about sampling and being in the studio and the changes of technology.
Mhm.
All of those, innovations, all of those, introduced entities, they all still required human interaction, and in fact ingenuity and creativity, and and like Martin said, it eliminated the terrible drummers. We're using the censored language here, but just like that, Tim, I could teach anybody to write a lesson plan. It doesn't mean they're a good teacher, right? And it doesn't mean it has your unique human personal touch. It doesn't, it doesn't have harmony with how you're in the classroom with young people. Those are great lesson plans, and those will always be very human specific to the moment and the relationships happening in classrooms. So yeah, it made it speed up the process of hey, you got to do this task that might have taken you an hour, and now it takes 15, 20 minutes. Yeah, but it's not going to be unique to you. So I like what Martin's saying. Figure out where it fits. And the other thing that came up, I keep thinking about is we're chewing the fat on AI, and especially in relationship to music and marketing and all of that. I keep thinking about that Sandpaper album. AI can't put a sandpaper finish that I can touch and feel. We as humans are always going to have an affinity for tangible experiences, especially for ones that are different and that stand out and that leave a lasting impact on us. And this is something that a lot of different forms of art have taught us, but certainly punk has, right? So it's those moments where it says, it takes, I'm feeling censored today. It takes, I don't even know how to say
Yeah.
it, but it puts a shine on something that wasn't supposed to be shiny, and now it's not. And in fact, it's standing and it's enjoyed, and it's shifting and changing, and it's leaving some kind of feeling with us. That I can't imagine. Can AI give us a sandpaper finish like that album that is in the collection there at the post-punk museum?
Well,
I don't think it'll give us a sandpaper finish, but I'm kind of more, and I'll let Martin jump in here, but I think the next person that figures out the new sandpaper finish by using AI is going to be that. And that's where, and Martin, it's funny because Johnny and I can go back and forth. Johnny's kind of the AI nemesis, and I'm kind of the AI going, but it can allow us to do really great stuff, man.
I mean, you can have the perfect lesson plan, and then you've got a teacher who wants to stick to the perfect plan. And I think the perfect plan has built in oh, class is going like this. Or when I mentioned soccer or industrial music or tennis, whatever, the class seemed to go, ooh, and we had a great interaction. I'd like to have more sports related themes bouncing off these central ideas. And so I think AI can help you do that, and I looked at a tour today in class that our agent routed quite badly, and I spent a lot of time finding problems with a run between Oklahoma City and Denver back up to Minneapolis, and it could have been done by AI. Basically, I had to work it all out, argue with the agent, and if that had been taken care of, if I'd been using AI to run some analyses of the tour, I could have concentrated on two other shows that would have been quite easy to make much better, like 80-20 rule, So I'm still at that point. I'm not worried about being replaced by AI. I think some layout artists might be. You can do a flyer like that on Canva with the AI plugin. I think it's the end of mediocrity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
which is exciting because it pushes our students to be excellent, to find some, and to be excellent, you really have to find something you're passionate about. So I think this is going to turn schooling on its head. It's going to say you can't just go through the motions. You can't just sit there and behave and be great at something anymore. You really have to be great. You really have to love it. You have to live in it. You have to feel it. You have to, learn the ins and out of it. And roll. You got to be able to have jazz in the classroom, right? You got to be able to improv with the young minds.
But I wanted to say this when when Tim described you as the AI nemesis, right? But I don't know how a combustion engine works. Well, maybe a 1954 Ford Crestline, I can figure that out. But cars today, I have no clue. But I'm a decent driver and I can get from A to B.
Hey, yep.
There it is. It's Martin Atkins, man.
Yeah,
the time,
love it.
Holy crap. Martin, though, the Museum of Post-Punk Industrial Music in Chicago, Martin, they can find that by going to ppimchicago.com. Martin Atkins, thank you for busting pencils with us.
Yeah. You're welcome. It's a blast.
Yeah, much love, my man.
All right. Johnny and I will break it down when we get back. School's out. Not yet, we said. Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk, educated educators talking education. 855-752-4842. Great guest, Martin Atkins. Public Image Limited, and people are thinking like Public Image Limited, post-punk, what's that? So Public Image Limited, and we'll do a quick little history lesson. After the Sex Pistols, Johnny Rotten becomes Johnny Lydon, forms the band Public Image Limited. Martin is one of the original drummers of that band. That brings Martin into that scene. But as he talks about, he was living in Northern England at the time and had to move down to London to experience that, got involved in the music scene. And here we are now, almost 50 years later, and he's still an educator. He's a punk rocker, still museum curator. And the conversation, I always love having Martin on because he really brings together so many different topics. And this is it's kind of the spirit of saying, why did Busted Pencils Radio, Busted Pencils, the podcast, come into existence? It was to make these connections, to say education isn't sterile. It shouldn't be sterile. It shouldn't be overproduced. And in fact, we've gotten to that point. And I think a lot of these, examples that we talk about is that if we were doing, if education truly was the next punk rock, or if we were trying to do this, man, it would be a whole lot more rewarding and experiential for students, teachers, parents. And Johnny, just making that connection and going, boy, you know what? When you want to practice democracy, right? It's messy. It's messy.
Man, I mean, punk rock is democracy in action. That's the thing. And artistry, whatever your craft is, whatever your, medium of choice is. I always say this, we are in this age of the artist. It's almost like a new renaissance in terms of who has dealt with these kinds of complexities. We're all perplexed, like AI, what's it going to be like? And we've talked about it on the show. We've said like, hey, let's put on our hats and remember being in the studio as musicians, and and the advent of auto tune and Pro Tools and all the different things that came onto the scene that changed how we did what we do in the studio. And we talked about it with writing, like I was making jokes last week about typewriters and, word processors and whatnot. But we're having people who come on who have that artist mentality. There's a comfort with uncertainty. And in fact, there is I won't say it's comfort exactly, but there's an experience, a wisdom with uncertainty that, hey, they have this vision of when things aren't status quo is where great, amazing things happen. It's not always, I don't want to always say it's for better or for worse. It just kind of, things are changing, things are happening. And artists, in a sense, they live for this. We live in those moments. We stay in those cuts. And so when we want to better understand these kinds of complex things that are messy, like democracy, we turn to the artists, and the artists have so much to share about their process and the stories, right? Like having Martin on tonight was, a lesson in itself, not only in musical history, but in, the changes of technologies that are going to overall, even if for the moment it's producing a lot of crap, right? And that's sort of the argument I'm finding myself in, is that there's a whole lot of garbage coming from AI. Well, you know what, though? I like what Martin said, and I've said it before, so I loved hearing it, right? Is that it's going to make the work more meaningful. It's going to make the skill set necessary to be creative, to be putting something out there unique, important. So journalists are going to be more fine-tuned and able to focus on their passion rather than just, creating meaningless content. We can get AI to do that. So we get writers to write great things. We get musicians to make great music, and there's always going to be a need for the human mediation and element of that. I loved hearing it, man. And also, Tim, I'm starstruck every time we have our guests on. Every single guest we bring on here, it takes me back through memory lane of the first time I heard them either talk about education or speak at a conference, right? Or I read their book or I listened to their music. And it's a gift. So for listeners out there, thank you for being part of this. But I'm just in awe. I'm going to be in awe all night, just having been able to learn a little bit more from Martin today, and to be here with you all. So it's a special show,
man. Busted Pencils, fully leaded education talk. Yeah, we are educated educators talking education. The number's 855-752 4842. Just had a great guest, Martin Atkins, and we didn't even really get to spend the time engaging the Museum of Post-Punk. I mean, we've got some great, yeah, we got some more. We have some great examples of living through it. But, I really encourage people, to please check it out. If you're in that Chicago area and, the listeners that are all over the Wisconsin area, take a ride down there, but check out the website, ppimchicago.com, ppimchicago.com. We'll make sure also that we put that in the podcast link when it comes out later on when we release the podcast version of the show so people can do it. But check it out, man. Like you said, he just started collecting. Well, it was his own memorabilia. Think about that, right? So Public Image Limited, 9 Inch Nails, Ministry, Killing Joke, Pigface, all that time, all those tours, all the memorabilia that he collected, and just thinking over COVID, putting it together and going, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll let people start seeing all these things that I have kind of hiding in closets and all over the place. Now the #1 museum. And Johnny, we think about this, you really want, and his example of the museum of holding the sandpaper album just reminds me of what makes a great museum. It's those hands-on museums that allow children the opportunity to get in there, to touch, to play, to do things, and that interactiveness museum. And so hearing that again too, it's like, wait, you got one of the punk rock legends on your show? What's that have to do with education? Well, come on, man.
Everything, man.
Say,
everything.
Right?
Come on, man.
Now we're talking about come on, music, but a museum.
Yep.
Think about it. Great museums, there's something about them that is punk rock that makes it educational, dude, right?
And there's something really special about what Martin brings is he models his generosity and humility, right? He said it's not about like, hey, look, I did a museum, I'm in another
Yeah.
band. It's about that moment and sharing that moment and passing it on to future generations. So big ups to Martin. Thanks for joining us tonight. Listeners, great joining us. Hey, Tim, we got to keep talking about this because post-punk sounds an awful lot like post-schooling. And I'm wondering if we can't get into a conversation soon about, is there such thing as post-schooling?
That's a good question. Tomorrow, Friday. Check it out, man. We'll wrap up the week and a little bit of news. Busted pencils. See y'all tomorrow.